Good afternoon. My name is Scott Forcino. I am an associate broker with eXp Realty out of New York City in the metro area. I founded PlugIntro, so real estate agents and their referral partners can gain more and more local exposure. I have with me a real estate industry luminary slash celebrity, Saul Klein, someone I followed a long time and is really one of the original thought leaders and inspirations in the industry. I want to hear what he thinks today about where we are. Good afternoon, Saul.
Hey, Scott, how's it going?
Well, tell me, a quick little bit about your background and what you think where you see this industry going.
Well, I was a naval officer for 6 years. I was trained to be a naval officer, and in 1977, I had kidney stones. I got out of the Navy. I got into real estate, and I've been licensed as a broker in California since 1977. I've done many different things in real estate and many different approaches to the real estate and financial planning industry, and got into technology in the year 1995 and helped bring Realtor.com to market, help get all the listings on the internet, help do real estate syndication, provide listings to really the world, and had two companies purchased by a major software company, Yardi, in 2010, 2011. And now I just speak and write and pretty much do what I want to do. I live in San Diego, so it's a great place to be when you're 73 years old and you have some time to kind of think about where life is and what you've done and how you can kind of help people. So I spend a lot of time writing just to write because it helps me put my thoughts in order.
I see.
Right.
So, I see you writing prolifically over the years and with your organization, Real Town, and I know that you're a person that is information is really sought. So where do you see the real estate industry, maybe not in depth in this time, but with the lending and with the Department of Justice lawsuit, what's going to happen?
Yes, a lot of stuff. The whole industry could collapse in the way that we currently know it to operate. Now, that's just a short, and we could talk a lot about that. But there's a lot of things out there that really could be very destructive and not necessarily consumer friendly to the way things are taking place and what's taking place. And we've got this combination of things going on, right? We've got major litigation, both civil and then the Department of Justice. We've got massive inflation beyond anybody's wildest dream and expectation for a number of reasons. We got great risk in the capital markets that most people aren't aware of. We've got a market in real estate. It's kind of interesting. Real estate's gone crazy, hasn't it? Since COVID, it's really like COVID. Before that, it was kind of moving, but since COVID, it's gone crazy. And people saying, well, why? 70%, 20% increases in value. And then we think, didn't we dump like a couple extra $1 trillion into the money supply? And if you dump a couple extra $1 trillion into the money supply, won't it kind of jack prices up? And so I think nobody's kind of talked about the fact that a lot of the things we did for COVID was just added on top of the quantitative easing that took place in 2008 timeframe, and we never got out of that. And so where's the market headed? More inflation. We've been through this before. How do you curb inflation? You raise interest rates. We've been through this before. What happens? The economy slows down. Eventually you'll see unemployment. Interest rates will get back to probably where they were at one time. People talking about where's it going to be by the end of the year. I wouldn't be surprised if mortgage rates were 6% by the end of the year. Now, some people say 6% next year. I'm thinking maybe by the end of the year. What happens every time the rate notches up a little bit? Somebody is frozen out of the market. But at the same time, maybe there's a little bit more inventory. Maybe there are people who would buy that, who didn't want to compete in the market they were in. So there's a downside to what's taking place, right? We think things are going to slow down. The other thing I think is people are continuing to buy and sell real estate. So from that perspective, when I bought my first piece of real estate, I assumed an 8.75% loan.
Wow.
And when I bought my first business, which was a car wash business in San Diego, which I still own, I paid 10% owner carry. And so interest rates go up and interest rates go down, and people buy and sell, and people always need to buy and sell. And so I think that people who, if you're a realtor, I think you need to double down on your prospecting right now. I think the market is going to slow down. How much? I don't know. How many units do we see transact every year in the 5 to 6 million range? That's pretty consistent. And I think we'll probably, even with this, we'll see That number, matter of fact, the latest numbers from NAR annualized are in that range between 5.2, 5.3 million units, which is like a little over 10, 11 million sides. Divided up amongst all the realtors. We know that's not true. It's not divided up amongst all the realtors.
No.
It's divided up amongst those people who are productive, right? And who can earn a living in the business. So I think that if you're selling real estate, you continue to sell real estate. You listen to what's going on. You pay attention to it. One of the reasons you pay attention is that your clients are going to want to know about this. Now, every once in a while I write something and I get some realtor that says, I don't mention that because I stay in my lane. Have you heard that?
Sure.
Stay in my lane. Well, you know what? I'm not talking about somebody asking you a tax question and you giving them the answer for their specific tax question. I'm saying you need to know a little bit about generally what's taking place, because they ask you, you can give them a general answer. You need to understand and know about inflation, not because you're an economic expert, because it's going to be of interest to the people you do business with, and it is in your lane. Now, to give them specific individual advice about what's going to happen specifically, no, you're not going to go there. But I think that one of the things that can help people succeed and make it through this portion of this business cycle, which will terminate at some point, and we'll start moving in the other direction again, is paying attention to what's going on. Pay attention to things you might not have thought that you were interested in before, like inflation and what causes it. What's the result of it? And how might it impact your clients? And here's one more thing, Scott, and I don't want to take too much time, and that is that there's huge opportunity now. There's always opportunity. And so when we see markets tightening up, it creates opportunities in other places. So one of the big things that's happening right now is changes in land use policy across the country. And the land use policy driven by policy and funding. And so money's there to change land use policy. We've got to correct the biggest problems in the country today, things like affordability and homelessness and climate and all those things. And the only way we can address those is by better utilizing the land that we have. And so there's lots of things in the works. And I think people that list and sell real estate today and investors just need to pay close attention, because the government's going to start pushing money into your neighborhood. Well, maybe not your neighborhood, but I'd want to make it my neighborhood if the government's pushing money down into the neighborhood. And so we will see new funding in certain areas to increase walkability, to increase density. I don't know if you saw in California, it just passed a couple laws that kind of changed zoning completely in California and basically take it out of the hands to a degree of the locals and push it up to the state level. Like every property in California now, you can build an extra unit on. Yeah, that's amazing. So when I sold real estate, and I haven't sold real estate for other people in a long time, but when I sold real estate, I got into selling apartment buildings and helping people find properties. And we would go out and look for properties that were zoned for multiple units that only had a house on it. So we'd look for properties in a part of the city where the land was zoned R3, let's say, zoned for an apartment building, but it had a single family house on it. Because we knew somebody would want to come in, a developer would want to come in, tear the house down and build 8 units. And increase the density. So as a real estate broker, I was looking for underutilized properties, because an underutilized property means more to an investor. And that was the market that I kind of worked. Well, in California, they just made every property in the state an underutilized property.
Wow. So you're going to see tons of teardowns. You're going to see people even building on top of their car.
I think you will see that kind of thing. But here's the thing. When those types of things, when the government decides to do those kinds of things, it takes 40 or 50 years to see the result. I mean, because it takes a while to get started. I had personal experience in this in an area that I worked in San Diego called the Mid-City area, which is a gigantic area. And in 1979, the city decided, the federal government said, we got block grant financing. So the city, if you can go give this money away to businesses and the people who own real estate and get them to increase the value, then the tax base will go up and you, the city, will make more money. And so the city, they did it through block grant financing. That's a whole nother lesson, right? And so we actually, and my business partners, 4 of us brand new real estate brokers, we said, this is great. The money's going to come into the neighborhood and let's participate. And we did, and it took 40 years. I mean, things happened over time, but those houses now in parts of San Diego, now part of this is inflation, but they're like $700,000-$800,000 houses that were $30,000 when I was selling. right? And that's not that long ago. I'm still here, right? And so what brought that change about? So you're right. Eventually, Scott, you'll see tear down, but it won't happen. So people who are afraid of it, it's going to ruin my neighborhood. It's going to change the local color. It won't happen overnight, but it will create opportunities for people who listen to sell real estate. And so that's something to pay attention. And it's back to this thing of there's lots of things going on.
Something I want to ask you, I mean, because this is a big topic. What will happen to buyers agents if there is no offer of compensation?
You know, that's an interesting, because you're referring to a couple of lawsuits, right? Civil suits, one in Missouri, one in Illinois, that the claim is, and it's kind of complicated, but if I had to kind of get down to the bottom of it, it's that there's this offer of compensation in the multiple listing service. And so when I take a listing, I put it in the multiple listing service and I agree to pay anybody who brings a buyer to my seller. If they consummate the sale, I agree to bring them a commission or pay them a commission.
That's right.
There are lawsuits that say that rule takes away the seller's right to negotiate the buyer's commission. Right? It says, you know, I know. And so that being the case, if you know, the courts were to rule, you know what, that's true, that seller didn't have the right to negotiate that, there could be a situation where an agent's commission is not guaranteed through the MLS. And if it's not, so that's the question. If it's not guaranteed through the MLS, then how are you going to guarantee commission for yourself in a real estate transaction? Commercial brokers been dealing with this for years, right? But in residential, agents never bothered to get a contract with the buyer because they didn't have to, because they always knew they were going to get compensated. Even though they could represent the buyer, they always knew they'd get compensated through the MLS. And if that rule that the compensation could flow from the listing broker, if that rule were to change, and there are indications that it might, right, the litigation, class action litigation, it looks like, right, that's been certified for class action, that makes it even a bigger potential. That could eliminate that capability of the MLS to allow for, which I think is a good thing, the offer of compensation, which helps create this marketplace. And then that would change the way people practice. And I think what it would force people to do who represent buyers is somehow get a written agreement with the buyer, which I think that's a good idea anyway.
Yeah, it is. But, you know, the written agreement usually has to do with agency, and then that doesn't necessarily touch the compensation. And, you know, the fights that I've heard about that are agents saying, it's kind of ironic. Imagine saying, oh, the people wouldn't pay. And I said, well, so your services are so valueless that they wouldn't pay them? I mean,
yeah. Well, so
they won't pay $40 for a stick.
Great point. There's a difference between agency disclosure and a buyer agent contract. So agency disclosure is one thing. You're right. That's just a disclosure. That doesn't bind anything. There's no payment of commission. It's an agency disclosure. And those agency disclosure laws happened around 1986 or so. I was an expert on that at one time when they first got passed. And what happened was you were required to make, in California, the rule was when you establish more than a casual relationship with a buyer or seller, you have to sign a disclosure telling them who you represent. There's nothing about compensation. It's just telling them who you represent. That's the law. You got to do that. Now, do you have to get a contract with them that says if I find a property for you, the buyer, are going to pay me? There is no contract. There is a contract. People don't get it signed.
No, they're afraid, and that's really not reflective in some markets of the customs and practices. You're right.
Yep.
It's different. I mean, I have a personal view on it from my attorney background, where why does a seller want to pay for the legal representation of the contractual counterpart? Because that's unheard of in America. Where else does one party pay for the representation of another party? Nowhere. So you're paying someone to lowball you?
Well, so you're right. It's a fiduciary. It's a weird deal, right? But is there a consumer benefit? Does it create a marketplace? Now, I'd say the story around MLS, and for me, the important thing about MLS is if you look at the commercial marketplace, they don't have MLS. And the commercial marketplace was always a mess to me, and people always protected their data. When MLS was formed, what brokers agreed to is they agreed to put their listings together. And so to make it fair, they made these rules that said, look, we're going to come together. I'm going to share my best listings with you, and I want you to share your best listings with me, and I'm going to share my worst listings with you, and I want you to share your worst listings with me. Now, if there's no rule around this, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm only going to put my worst listings in the, I'm going to go out and try to sell this myself as long as I can. And when I don't, and we had a commercial MLS in San Diego. It was the dregs. You didn't have any good, you could make good deals out of what was in there. And that's what we do. We'd look at this and we'd figure out who wanted to sell and we'd make deals out of it. But the good deals didn't get in the commercial book. But in the residential book, they all got in because brokers decided it was in their best interest to be able to show to consumers everything. And so by doing that, but it created this situation that's evolved today because of litigation to where you've got this dual agency, you've got weird representation, but that's an evolution. And it's an interesting evolution. So it's an ongoing question. We've seen it for a number of years. Who do you represent? How can you do that? How can you represent? Who pays for what? And,
who pays for what? That's the whole thing. I mean, the seller binds themselves, but the buyer funds the deal. I mean, I call that whole thing a legal fiction. And that's, that's really for our next interview because that's such a huge topic.
Well, I just think and people argue with me about this. The transaction funds the both sides. It's all funded from the transaction. No transaction, no pay, right?
Well, and there are some nuances. I mean, a buyer gets in a car in New York. They don't know what the agent is making. They don't know what it'll cost for 30 years. And they don't know that they could avoid financing. They could pay it at closing like they pay the moving company. So those are three bases in which there's a real strong objection. So, Saul, I thank you for coming today. Let's continue this. I really appreciate your input. I know there's so much. I know you're a font of knowledge. We're going to create an audience for you. We're going to show you off with your vast knowledge and expertise. And I look forward to our next time.